The wail of sirens tore through the tranquility of our street, but from my neighbor's living room window, the only sound I could hear was my own breathing, calm and steady. The red and blue lights of the emergency vehicles danced across the shocked faces of our neighbors, all gathered on their lawns, pointing, whispering, filming with their phones the circus of horrors unfolding in my house, in my master bedroom. And at the center of it all was him, Richard, my husband, and her, Sophia, my son's fiancée. Their screams were muffled by the glass, but the image was crystal clear, a tangled mess of panic, pain, and the purest, rawest public humiliation. One tube of industrial-grade adhesive, a simple swap, a sordid little secret he kept in his glove compartment, now transformed into a public sentence, carried out by me. Each of their desperate cries was a note in the symphony I had so carefully composed. The crowd outside will judge me as a monster, the crazy wife, the woman blinded by revenge. They have no idea that what I did wasn't an act of madness, but of absolute clarity. They can't imagine what those two had planned for me and for my son's future. Watching that grotesque spectacle, a single certainty filled me. This wasn't revenge. It was the only way out. The story you're about to hear will shock you. Make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss a single detail, because the truth is far crueler than revenge. They call me crazy now. They whisper my name with a mixture of pity and contempt. The woman who snapped. The trophy wife who finally cracked under the pressure. It's an easy, comfortable narrative, but until yesterday, my name, Caroline, was synonymous with perfection. For 25 years, I was the silent pillar upon which Richard built his world. To society, I was the devoted wife who hosted flawless dinner parties, the mother who never missed a PTA meeting, the owner of Caroline's Confections, a charming bakery everyone saw as my elegant hobby, a hobby that conveniently paid for the vacations in Europe and the imported car Richard drove. They saw the facade, the power couple, the exemplary son, the picture-perfect family. No one saw the cracks I spent my nights trying to patch. No one knows that it was I who sold my grandmother's jewelry to fund Richard's first failed startup. No one imagines the long nights I spent in front of spreadsheets, optimizing every cent from my hobby to cover the holes his high-risk ventures left in our bank account. He was the face, the charisma, the man who shook hands and closed deals over expensive lunches. I was the invisible foundation, the engineer who made sure the building wouldn't collapse. I raised our son, Ethan, practically on my own, between batches of scones and cake orders, while Richard traveled to expand his horizons. I swallowed his excuses, his growing distance, his lack of interest in our life. I told myself it was the price of success. My mistake wasn't loving him. My mistake was my silence. A silence that lasted so long he forgot I had a voice. I became such a reliable safe harbor that he believed I was part of the landscape, an acquired asset, permanent and unshakable. A woman who absorbed all the pain without ever complaining. I accepted that role for far too long. I welcomed Sophia as a daughter, teaching her my family's recipes, opening the doors of my home and my heart, never realizing I was nursing a viper at my breast. They grew accustomed to my resilience, to my ability to forgive the unforgivable. They mistook my patience for submission, my kindness for stupidity. What they didn't know is that the same hand that precisely measures the sugar to create the most delicate pastry also knows the exact dose of poison. And they were about to discover the terrifying noise my silence was capable of making. But what was that noise? It wasn't the sharp, predictable sound of anger. It was something deeper, older. It was the echo of 25 years of unspoken words, of unrecognized merit, of invisible sacrifices. It was my soul, finally, screaming for one thing, something money couldn't buy, and social status couldn't grant: respect. My hidden desire was never about exposing an affair. Infidelity was just a symptom of a much more serious disease. What I wanted, what I needed with the urgency of a drowning person, was the truth. Not the truth about who Richard was sleeping with, but the truth about who I was. I longed to rip off the lucky wife mask that he and the world had forced me to wear, and show everyone the woman who was truly holding up that house of cards. I wanted my son, Ethan, to know that the comfort he grew up in wasn't born from his father's genius, but from his mother's sweat and sleepless nights. In the beginning, we were a team. I fell in love with a Richard full of dreams, and I dove headfirst into every one of them. I was the one who wrote the business plan for his first company, using what I'd learned with my business degree before I gave up my career to support him. I was the one who negotiated with the bank manager, offering my small inheritance as collateral. But as success arrived, the narrative subtly shifted. We did it became I did it. My ideas, whispered to him in bed at night, were presented as his own in boardrooms the next day. My bakery, which started as a necessity to pay the bills when his ventures faltered, was rebranded by him as Caroline's charming little hobby. Every success of mine was diminished, turned into an accessory for his grand story. And I, for love, for peace, for our son's stability, allowed it. I would smile at parties when they introduced him as a visionary, while I was just his wife. Every smile was a small piece of my identity being surrendered. This desire to be seen, to be acknowledged, corroded me in secret. I felt guilty. Guilty for searching his pockets for a receipt that would validate my suspicions. Guilty for feeling a sick sense of relief with each new blatant lie, because each one brought me closer to the truth. I was betraying the image of the perfect family I had fought so hard to build. Maintaining the facade was my duty, what was expected of me. But the truth was like a hunger, an obsession that grew with every distant look from him, every suspicious phone call he took in another room. The turning point came at a Chamber of Commerce dinner. Richard took the stage to receive the Entrepreneur of the Year award. In his speech, he thanked everyone, and finally turned to me in the audience and said, with a patronizing smile, "And to my dear Caroline, who keeps me well fed and my shirts pressed. Behind every great man is a great woman, right?" The audience applauded, and I felt the floor disappear. In that instant, my desire ceased to be a silent yearning and became a mission. I had to destroy the lie he had built, even if it meant destroying everything with it. But there was an insurmountable obstacle, a wall that protected Richard from any attack I could launch: the unconditional love Ethan felt for him. My son saw his father as a hero, and Richard, cruelly and calculatingly, used that adoration as his most powerful shield. To get to the truth, I would have to fire through the heart of my own son, and I didn't know if I had the courage to pull the trigger. The weeks that followed that humiliating speech were a silent hell. I lived in a state of paralysis, trapped between the certainty of his betrayal and the paralyzing fear of destroying my son. Richard's human shield was impenetrable. I would watch him from across the dinner table, a smiling stranger, and see a master manipulator at the height of his power. He knew that I knew something. There was a new caution in his eyes, but he also knew that Ethan was my weak spot, my kryptonite, and he felt safe behind our son's love. I was in an emotional checkmate, forced to participate in the theater of the happy family to protect the only person who still mattered. I smiled. I cooked. I asked about his day, and every act of normality was a stab to my own soul. The truth was caught in my throat, a scream that couldn't be released. I needed a reason bigger than my own pain, and on a rainy Saturday afternoon, the universe, in its precise cruelty, gave me one. It was Ethan's 24th birthday. I was planning a family dinner, a small celebration to mark the occasion. I wanted to surprise him with a slideshow of old photos, from his first steps to his college graduation. The best pictures were in an old leather-bound album, stored somewhere in Richard's office, a room I avoided like the plague. Taking a deep breath, I entered. The air was heavy with the smell of his cigars and old lies. I started searching the dusty shelves, then the closet. Nothing. My last option was the large mahogany desk, his private sanctuary. I opened the first drawer, filled with business papers and expensive pens. In the second, I found what I was looking for. The album was at the bottom, under a pile of contracts, but as I pulled it out, my hand brushed against something cold and smooth, hidden in a false bottom I never knew existed. It was a phone. Small, cheap, disposable, a burner phone. My heart hammered in my chest like a trapped bird. With trembling fingers, I turned it on. No password. The screen lit up, revealing a single text thread, a history that seemed to go back for months. The contact was saved as S. Sophia. Bile rose in my throat as I started to read. They weren't just love messages. It was a plan. A sordid, detailed plan. I read about how Richard was convincing Ethan to invest his entire trust fund, a fund I had built for him with profits from the bakery, into one of his promising startups, a shell company, designed to fail. They discussed how, after the money was wired to an offshore account, the company would declare bankruptcy, and Ethan would lose everything. He'll never suspect a thing. He trusts his father more than he trusts himself, Richard had written. Sophia's reply was even crueler. The boy is naive. It will be for his own good. to learn a lesson. They weren't just cheating on me. They were actively plotting to destroy my son's financial future, his own son's, to fund their getaway. They were going to rob him, humiliate him, and then console him, posing as concerned parents. The air left my lungs. The pain in my chest was physical, crushing. My dilemma dissolved into dust. This was no longer about protecting Ethan from the truth. It was about protecting him from his own father. I kept scrolling, nausea consuming me, until my eyes landed on the last message, sent by Richard that very morning. A sentence that wasn't just proof, it was my permission to go to war. It was the key that unlocked all my fury. The message read, "Tonight, after the birthday dinner, he signs the papers. Tonight, he signs the papers." The words on the screen glowed with a venomous light. For a moment, the world shrank to that small, luminous rectangle in the dim office. The sound of my own heart beating was a deafening drum in my ears. A terrifying, deep war drum. Each beat seemed to say, "Do something." The air grew thin, and I leaned on the mahogany desk to keep from collapsing. The image of my son, Ethan, smiling, trusting, handing his future over to the man who should have been his greatest protector, flashed through my mind. And in that instant, shock morphed into something else. A cold, heavy, and absolutely clear fury. There was no more dilemma. No more fear. Hesitation disintegrated, replaced by a steel-clad certainty. I had to act, and it had to be tonight. I forced my body to move. I placed the burner phone back in its secret compartment. A viper returned to its nest. I picked up the photo album, the original reason for my search, and its weight in my hands felt like a cruel irony, a book of happy memories that now seemed like a compendium of lies. I walked out of the office, closed the door, and took a deep breath, building a wall of calm around myself. No one could see the storm raging inside. As I reached the dining room, the smell of the roast I had prepared with such care hung in the air, a perfume of domesticity and betrayal. Ethan and Sophia were laughing at something Richard was saying. He, the center of attention, the benevolent patriarch. She, the adoring fiancée, looking at him with an admiration that now made my stomach turn. "Found it," I said, my voice sounding frighteningly normal. I held up the album with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "We'll be taking a trip down memory lane after dinner." Ethan lit up. "Mom, you're the best." He was so good, so pure. And they were going to use that purity against him. The dinner proceeded in a fog of falsehood. I watched them. Every gesture, every complicit glance exchanged over a wine glass. They were perfect actors. Richard told stories about his youth, painting himself as a self-made hero. Sophia encouraged him, asking the right questions, laughing at the right moments. I ate in silence, chewing my food and my rage. They interpreted my silence as they always did, as tiredness, as the passivity of a woman who no longer participated in important conversations. They had no idea my silence was active, predatory. I was hunting, memorizing every detail for the attack to come. Then, after the cake was served and happy birthday was sung, the moment arrived. Richard cleared his throat, commanding everyone's attention. He stood up, the very picture of authority and fatherly love. "Ethan, my son, today, you don't just get a year older. You become a man ready to build his own legacy. And as your father, my greatest pride is to be able to give you the tools for it." He bent down and picked up a leather briefcase from the floor. He placed it on the table with theatrical solemnity. "This," he said, "is an opportunity. The chance to invest in a project that will not only triple your net worth in 2 years, but will also teach you what it takes to be a winner in this world." Ethan looked at the briefcase, his eyes shining with admiration and excitement. Sophia squeezed his hand, her face overflowing with false pride. "Honey, that's incredible. Your father trusts you so much." My son, my boy, looked at me, his face open, waiting for my approval. "Mom, what do you think?" I opened my mouth to speak, to scream, to warn him. But Richard's voice cut me off like a razor. He laughed, a patronizing, condescending sound. "Oh, darling," he said, placing his hand on mine, a gesture that was more of an order than a comfort. "Let's not bore your mother with market jargon and financial projections. You know how Caroline is. She's the soul of our home, the artist. Leave the business to us." He turned back to Ethan, dismissing me from the conversation with brutal ease. In that instant, in front of my son, on his birthday, I was reduced to nothing. A cook, a decorator, an ignorant maternal figure, incapable of understanding the world of men. The humiliation was so intense, so public, that for a second, the world went white. I saw Ethan, hesitant for a moment, but then sucked back in by his father's pitch. I saw the pen in his hand, ready to sign away his own ruin. And I understood. I understood that words would be useless. They had silenced me so effectively that any protest would be seen as hysteria. If I wanted to save my son, I couldn't use my voice. I had to use my hands. With a motion that seemed to last an eternity, my arm moved. My hand, trembling with contained fury, knocked against my glass of red wine. The dark liquid flew through the air and landed with a wet thud, soaking the papers, the signature line, the stolen future, staining everything a deep, blood-like red. A thick, heavy silence fell over the table, broken only by the hissing sound of wine being absorbed by paper. The dark red spread across the contracts like a hemorrhage, erasing clauses and signatures in a crimson smear of destruction. On the outside, I was the picture of distress. My hand flew to my mouth in a rehearsed gesture of horror. Oh my God, I can't believe it. I'm so clumsy. I'm so sorry. My words were a babble of feigned panic. The performance of a lifetime. Ethan was the first to react, his natural kindness coming to my rescue. Mom, calm down, it's nothing. It was an accident. He stood up, grabbing a napkin to try and save the ruined documents. Sophia remained frozen, a tight smile on her face, her eyes fixed on the pool of wine with an intensity that bordered on hatred. But it was Richard's reaction that gave me everything I needed. For a fraction of a second, the loving father mask slipped, and I saw what was underneath. A pure, cold, murderous fury flashed in his eyes. It was a flicker, quick as lightning, but I saw it. I saw the thwarted predator, the con man whose perfect plan had just been delayed by his artistic, ignorant wife. And then, the mask was back in place. He forced a laugh, the sound hollow and joyless. Darling, don't worry about it. Paper is just paper. The important thing is that we're all okay. He looked at me with a false compassion that couldn't hide the threat in his pupils. They thought it was an accident, and that belief was my greatest asset. As I helped clean up the mess, my mind worked with a speed and clarity I hadn't felt in years. The pain of the humiliation from minutes before began to crystallize. The fire of shame didn't go out. It concentrated, hardening into a diamond of determination. Every condescending word from Richard, every look of contempt from Sophia, every drop of red wine on that paper became the ingredients of my resurrection. I understood, with brutal lucidity, that the woman they had tried to silence at that table no longer existed. They had killed her. They had ridiculed her to death and poured wine on her grave. And what emerged from her wreckage was something they were not prepared to face. The sadness, the hurt, the betrayed wife who would cry into her pillow, all of it evaporated. In its place, a cold vacuum formed, and in that vacuum, a single seed began to sprout. Strategy. They underestimated me. That would be their epitaph. They saw me as a decorative piece in their game, and now I would become the entire board. I would use the persona they had created for me as my camouflage. I would continue to be the sweet, slightly airheaded wife, the artist who didn't understand numbers, the woman who needed protection. And from the shadows of that disguise, I would move my pieces, one by one, until I had them completely surrounded. They taught me the most important rule of their game. There are no rules. And I, who had always played fair, who had always believed in kindness and justice, finally learned the lesson. Justice isn't something you're given. It's something you take. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I didn't go to my room. I went to the bakery. The silence of the place, the familiar smell of sugar and flour, had always been my refuge. But that night, I didn't seek comfort. I sought weapons. I sat at my small office desk, the same one where I had built the empire they tried to steal, and took out a blank sheet of paper. The tears I held back during dinner didn't come. The ache in my chest was no longer an open wound, but a forge, burning and shaping something new. My brain, once clouded by pain, was now sharp, focused. Ideas began to flow, not with the passion of an artist, but with the precision of a general planning an invasion. The woman they humiliated died at the dinner table, drowned in disillusionment and red wine. The woman who sat in that bakery, under the cold light of dawn, didn't weep. She plotted. The solitude I felt in that moment was immense. If my story is reaching you, tell me what city you're in. I make a point to read and reply to everyone. The morning sun found a woman in the mirror I barely recognized. The eyes, puffy from a sleepless night, were not filled with sadness, but with a feverish concentration. The plan I had scribbled on a napkin at the bakery was bold, dangerous, and every step needed to be executed with a surgeon's precision. The first step was the riskiest. Return to the scene of the crime. Go back to Richard's office and retrieve the weapon, the burner phone. I waited until he left for one of his early morning meetings. The sound of his luxury car pulling away down the street my green light, with my heart hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I entered his sanctuary again. My hands, which had trembled spilling the wine, were now steady. I went straight to the drawer, to the secret compartment. The phone was there, untouched. He was too arrogant to even imagine I could discover it. I sat in his leather chair, a throne of lies, and began my work. Methodically, I photographed every message screen with my own phone, every word of mockery about me, every detail of the sordid plan to steal Ethan's trust fund, every promise of a future together. Built on the ruins of our family, I created a digital dossier, a collection of evidence so irrefutable that not even the best lawyer in the world could dispute it. When I was finished, I wiped my fingerprints from the device and placed it exactly where I had found it. The time bomb was back in its place, but now, I held the detonator. My second move was to protect my empire. Caroline's Confections wasn't a hobby. It was my fortress, my life's work, and the true source of our family's wealth, and I would not allow Richard's dirty hands to touch it in the implosion to come. I called Mr. Adler, my lawyer, and a longtime friend, a man whose distrust of Richard had always been a quiet secret between us. I scheduled an urgent meeting under the pretext of estate planning. In his office, with the smell of old books and justice in the air, I didn't reveal everything. Not yet, but I revealed enough. Adler, Richard's investments are getting riskier, I said, my voice calibrated to sound like a concerned wife, not a woman preparing an attack. I want to ensure that no matter what happens, the bakery and the assets in my name are firewalled. I want to create an irrevocable trust in Ethan's name, one that neither Richard nor I can access without the consent of a board. Adler looked at me over his glasses, his intelligent eyes seeing beyond my performance. He didn't ask many questions. He just nodded and began drafting the documents. That afternoon, I signed a series of papers that built an impenetrable legal wall around everything that was mine. I was cutting off the enemy's supply lines before he even knew he was at war. The final step of this preparatory phase was surveillance. The phone dossier was devastating, but it focused on the financial crime. I needed the image, the visual proof of betrayal that would annihilate any shred of sympathy they might garner. I hired the best private investigator in the city, an ex-cop named Harding, known for his discretion and his lack of scruples. We met in a noisy downtown cafe, a place where we would just be two faces in the crowd. I handed him an envelope with cash and a photo of Richard and Sophia, taken in happier times. My instructions were brief and cold. I don't care if they're in love. I don't need sordid details. I need a timeline. Hotels, restaurants, clandestine meetings. I want high-resolution photos. I want evidence that can be used in a court of law and on the front page of a newspaper. You have 1 week. Harding looked at me, a rare glimmer of respect in his tired eyes. Understood, ma'am. Consider it done. While my secret army moved in the shadows, my performance at home reached a new level of excellence. I apologized to Richard 1,000 times for the accident with the papers. I feel so terrible, darling. It was so important for you and Ethan. He, in his smugness, consoled me. Don't worry, my love. I've already had new copies printed. Ethan will sign tomorrow. He smiled, believing he had won, believing the only thing I was worried about was a wine-stained rug. And I smiled back, a sweet, empty smile, as my mind calculated the next moves on the board. He thought he was playing chess. He had no idea I had already flipped the table. The house, once a prison of painful memories, became my stage. And I, the lead actress, began the performance that would define the rest of my life. The change in me was subtle, but to two guilty conspirators, it was like the sound of a fire alarm. The tearful, reclusive woman they expected to see after the dinner party humiliation vanished. In her place emerged a serene, almost cheerful Caroline. I started humming in the kitchen while making breakfast. I suggested to Richard that we take a romantic weekend trip, just the two of us, to reconnect. I watched, with cold satisfaction, as panic flickered in his eyes while he stammered an excuse about an unavoidable meeting. Instead of arguing or showing disappointment, as the old Caroline would have, I just smiled. A placid, understanding smile. Of course, dear. Work comes first, always. My acceptance was more destabilizing than any accusation. His passivity was the reaction of a man who expected a fight and found a fog. He didn't know how to fight the fog. I began to plant small seeds of paranoia, watering them with my unsettling calm. One afternoon, I found Richard in his office, reviewing the new copies of the contracts I had ruined. I brought him a cup of tea, a solicitous wife's gesture. As he took it, I said casually, "You know, darling, I've been thinking that accident with the wine made me realize how fragile everything is. That's why I spoke to Adler, our lawyer. I've decided to put the house and the bakery into a trust for Ethan. It's just a formality, to make sure his future is always secure, no matter what happens." I watched him over the rim of the teacup, the blood drained from his face. The words, lawyer, and secure future in the same sentence, coming from me, was a code red. He tried to play it off, but I saw his hand tremble slightly. "What an excellent initiative, Caroline. You're always thinking of everyone." But his eyes said something else. They asked, "What do you know?" With Sophia, the game was even crueler. She came to visit me under the pretext of comforting me over my recent fragile state. I received her with the warmest hug. I served her a slice of my most famous cake, the pecan and caramel. As she ate, I sat across from her and said, in the soft voice of a confidant, "You're like a daughter to me, you know? And I worry about you and Ethan. The most important thing in a relationship, I've learned, is honesty. A small lie, an omission, it's like a drop of poison in a recipe. At first, no one notices. But slowly, it contaminates everything. It turns what was sweet into something bitter, dangerous." I held her gaze, a sad smile on my face. "Promise me you'll always be honest with my son." Sophia choked on her cake. Her eyes filled with tears of guilt and fear. She stammered a promise, but the seed was planted. I had made her complicit in her own betrayal, forcing her to confront the rottenness of her actions through my veiled words. Their paranoia grew with each passing day. I started seeing them whispering in corners, casting furtive glances my way. My silence became a threat, my serenity an accusation. They could no longer predict my moves. I was an enigma, and it terrified them. The climax of my preparation came on a Friday, with the arrival of a plain manila envelope. It was Harding's first report. Richard saw it on the entryway table. "What's that, dear?" "Oh, nothing important," I replied, picking up the envelope. "Just a quote from a new supplier. I'm thinking of creating a line of chocolates, more intense, with a flavor people will never forget." I opened the envelope in front of him, revealing the top of a series of glossy photographs. The first was of Richard and Sophia, kissing in the parking lot of a cheap motel in the next town over. I looked at the photo, then at him, and smiled. I think I found exactly what I was looking for. He turned white as a sheet. He didn't say a word, just watched as I walked upstairs with the proof of his destruction in my hands. They thought my silence was my surrender. In reality, it was the silence of the eye of the storm, the terrifying quiet that precedes total devastation. The storm was about to arrive, and I was the storm. The night of the checkmate arrived disguised as a celebration. I announced a surprise engagement dinner for Ethan and Sophia, an intimate party, just for our closest friends. It was the perfect bait, a gilded trap they couldn't escape without raising suspicion. I invited our oldest friends, couples who had watched us build our lives together, and Adler, my lawyer, whom I asked to come as a family friend, but whose watchful eyes would be my legal witness. Richard and Sophia were forced to accept, to smile, to play their parts as the happy couple and united family. The tension beneath the surface was electric. They watched me, trying to decipher my serenity, my perfect hostess smile. They thought I was oblivious, or perhaps that I had forgiven them in my silence. Their ignorance was my greatest ally. I moved through the room with a grace I didn't feel, refilling glasses, offering hors d'oeuvres, the picture of the proud matriarch. Every smile I gave them was another nail in their coffins. The conversation at the dinner table was my masterpiece of psychological torture. I conducted it like a maestro, alternating between the sentimental and the dangerous. "I remember when Ethan was little," I began, looking at him with all the love in the world. "He trusted us so blindly, so purely. It's a blessing to have a son who believes every word you say, isn't it, Richard?" I saw my husband swallow hard, a knot of panic in his throat. Later I turned to Sophia. "And you, dear, you're so ambitious, so focused on the future. It's admirable. So many women lose their way, settle for less, but you know exactly what you want and how to get it. That determination will take you far." My words were a poisoned compliment. To the others, it sounded like a proud mother-in-law's speech. To her, it sounded like the sentence it was. Her eyes widened and she looked away, unable to meet my calm, accusing gaze. Then, after dessert, I stood up, gently tapping my spoon against a crystal glass. The chiming sound cut through the conversation. All eyes turned to me. The final performance was about to begin. Tonight, I started, my voice clear and steady, isn't just about celebrating an engagement. It's about celebrating family, the foundations we've built, the memories we've shared, and most importantly, the truth that binds us. Richard smiled, a relieved smile. He thought this was my speech of surrender. To honor this moment, I've prepared a little surprise, a look back at our journey, at our lives. I pressed a button on a remote control. The projection screen I had installed on the wall descended smoothly, and the room's lights dimmed. The first slide appeared, a photo of baby Ethan in my arms. Laughter and nostalgic sighs filled the room. The next photos told a happy story. Family picnics, beach vacations, Ethan's first bike. With each photo, I narrated a memory, my voice calm, filled with a false tenderness. Richard and Sophia began to relax, believing they had escaped, that my oddness of the past few days was just that. Then, the shift began, subtly. A photo of Richard at a conference in Chicago, dated from the previous year. Ah, that was such an important business trip, I said. The next slide. A photo of him, on the same day, at the same time, having lunch with Sophia at a charming cafe 20 minutes from our house. The photo, taken by Harding, was crisp, undeniable. A confused silence began to settle. The pace quickened. A photo of Sophia at her wedding dress fitting, sent by her in the family group chat. So beautiful. A true princess, I commented. The next slide. Sophia, in the same outfit, an hour later, getting into Richard's car, leaning in for a passionate kiss. The sound of someone gasping cut through the silence. Our friends' faces were contorting in a mixture of shock and embarrassment. The faces of Richard and Sophia were white, drained of blood, masks of pure terror. They were paralyzed, caught in the trap, exposed under the beam of the projector. But a family isn't just made of love, I continued, my voice now cold as ice. It's made of trust, especially when it comes to business. The slide changed. It was a clear photo of the burner phone screen, the entire conversation about Ethan's trust fund, about the shell company, about how he was naive. Every word was there, projected on the wall, for everyone to read. As you can see, I said, as the air was sucked out of the room, Richard wasn't just planning for Ethan's future. He and Sophia were planning a future for themselves, with my son's money. The last slide appeared. It was Richard's final message. Tonight, after the birthday dinner, he signs the papers. The sound of a sob escaped from Ethan. A sound that broke my heart, but saved his life. Checkmate. I turned off the projector, and the room plunged into a partial darkness, filled only with a heavy, accusatory silence. I turned to my guests, and then to the two traitors sitting at my table. My voice was a whisper, but it echoed like a gunshot. I think the party's over. The silence that followed my last sentence was the loudest thing I have ever heard. It was an absolute, dense, heavy vacuum, where the only movement was our friends' faces turning slowly, as if in a horror film, from Richard and Sophia to me, and then to Ethan. The smiles had frozen on their lips, transformed into masks of shock and disbelief. I watched decades of friendship and respect for Richard disintegrate in real time. The air in the room was unbreathable, thick with the rot of an exposed truth. Sophia was the first to break. A guttural sound, a strangled sob escaped her throat. She wasn't crying. She was coming apart, her body shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming down her made-up face, creating gullies of shame. Her desperate eyes searched for Ethan's, but my son no longer saw her. His gaze was fixed on nothing, his face a blank canvas on which the most terrible understanding was being painted in real time. Richard, true to his nature, chose fury, denial. He shot up from his chair, which clattered backward with a bang that made everyone jump. "What is this?" he roared, his voice echoing in the silent room. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "Are you all seeing this? She's lost her mind. She's sick, making up stories, forging photos, texts. Caroline, you need professional help. For God's sake, what has gotten into you?" He turned to the guests, trying to rally support, his old charisma now sounding desperate, pathetic. "You've known me for years. Are you going to believe this?" This hysterical performance from a bitter woman, but no one looked at him with sympathy. They looked with disgust. His outburst didn't seem like that of an innocent man. It seemed like that of a cornered animal, snarling before the kill. Adler, my lawyer, remained impassive, his cold, analytical gaze all the confirmation the others needed. Richard's attempt to paint me as crazy, his last-ditch effort, failed miserably. The evidence on the screen was cold, logical, and irrefutable. The hysteria, in that moment, was all his. Then, amidst the chaos of Richard's rage and Sophia's collapse, Ethan moved. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He stood up with a frightening calm, a dignity he certainly didn't inherit from his father. The boy who had walked into that room, happy and in love, was dead. The man who stood up in his place had the eyes of a war veteran. He didn't look at Richard. He ignored him completely, as if he had ceased to exist. Ethan walked slowly over to Sophia, who was sobbing into her hands. He stopped in front of her. The silence returned, even heavier than before. Everyone held their breath. In a low voice, almost a whisper, but one that cut through the air like glass, he said only 4 words: "Give me the ring." Sophia looked up, her face devastated. "Ethan, please, I can explain. I love you. The ring, now," he repeated, his voice devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of a judge delivering a final sentence. Trembling, she tried to pull the engagement ring from her finger, but her fingers were swollen, slippery with tears. She couldn't get it off. With a gentleness that was almost cruel in its lack of passion, Ethan took her hand, and with one firm motion, he slid the ring off her finger himself. He held it for a moment, looking at the diamond that had once symbolized his future. Then he turned, and without a word, placed the ring on the table, next to the wine-stained remnants of the contract. The small sound of metal on wood was the final decree. It was the sound of a future being executed. That broke the spell. Our friends, embarrassed and horrified, began to rise. One by one, they came to me, touching my arm, whispering, "I'm so sorry, Caroline. We're with you." Their looks toward Richard and Sophia were of pure contempt. The room emptied, leaving only the 4 protagonists of the drama behind. Adler approached Richard, who had collapsed into a chair, finally defeated. "Richard," he said, his voice professional and sharp, "given the evidence of fraud and conspiracy, my advice is that you do not say another word." Richard didn't answer. He just stared at the ring glittering on the table. Ethan came to my side, placing a protective arm around my shoulders. He didn't need to say anything. We were together. That's all that mattered. I looked at the scene. My ex-husband, a deposed king in his ruined castle. My son's ex-fiancée, a pathetic figure drowned in her own dishonor. In the deafening silence they had created with their lies, my truth had finally found its voice, and it was more powerful than any scream. The house fell into a dead silence after they were gone. The dinner leftovers, the half-empty glasses, the festive decorations, it all looked like a crime scene, the remains of a life that had been murdered that night. Ethan went up to his room without a word, and I was left alone in the dining room, amidst the devastation I had created. I didn't feel the triumph I had imagined. There was no euphoria. There was just a deep quiet, an exhaustive clarity. In that stillness, the word everyone would use to describe me from tomorrow on echoed in my mind. Villain, the cruel wife who publicly humiliated her husband, the woman who destroyed her own family in front of everyone. And looking at the wreckage, I knew they were right. I was the villain. I had become the villain this story needed to have an ending. For years, I believed that strength was in enduring, in absorbing pain in silence to keep the peace. I believed my sacrifice would one day be recognized. What a fool I was. The lesson I learned, burned into my soul that night, is that true strength doesn't lie in the ability to tolerate disrespect, but in the courage to declare it unacceptable. My line was crossed not when I discovered the affair, but when I realized they were conspiring to use my son's love as a weapon to destroy him. The infidelity hurt me. Their plan against Ethan hurt the universe. And against a malevolence of that magnitude, kindness is not a virtue, it's complicity. I don't regret what I did. Every photo, every word projected on that wall was a necessary surgical act to remove a cancer. I didn't break the rules of the game. I refused to play a game where the rules were written for me to always lose. I set the whole board on fire, but every war has a cost, and the cost of mine was my son's innocence. The image of Ethan's face when the truth hit him, that look of devastating comprehension, will stay with me forever. It is my scar, the price of my victory. In that moment, I saved him from a future of financial ruin, and a life with a woman who despised him. But to do so, I had to destroy his past. I had to force him to see his father not as the hero he idolized, but as a weak, cruel, and greedy man. I gave him the truth, but I ripped from him the security of his happiest memories. Would he ever forgive me for it? I didn't know, but I knew I would rather have his resentment for a painful truth than his love built on a dangerous lie. Self-love, I discovered, is not a passive feeling. It is an action. It is the decision to put yourself first, not out of selfishness, but for survival. The woman who smiled and served dinner while being erased from her own life is gone forever. The woman who remained, the villain of the story, might not be lovable, but for the first time in 25 years, she was, undeniably, free. And amid the ruins of my old life, I finally found a solid foundation on which to build the new one. Respect for myself. The dust from that night took a long time to settle. The scandal spread through our town like wildfire, fueled by the whispers of the guests from that dinner. Richard and Sophia became overnight pariahs. His fall was as swift as his rise was fraudulent, with the evidence of conspiracy and fraud in hand. My lawyer, Adler, had him cornered. The divorce was signed in less than a month. The man who saw himself as a king left our marriage with nothing but his clothes and a reputation in tatters. His friends and business partners abandoned him as if he had a contagious disease. He lost all his investments because without my capital to back his gambles, his house of cards collapsed. The last time I saw him, he was walking out of a grocery store. His face aged, his shoulders slumped. The visionary had become a ghost, haunted not by what I did, but by the man he truly was. Sophia vanished. 2 weeks after the party, she emptied her apartment and left town without a word. Her name became a local cautionary tale about ambition and dishonor. I felt nothing for her. Not hate, not pity. She was just a symptom of the disease, and the disease had been cured. For her, the game ended in the most humiliating way possible. She lost everything because she overestimated her power and underestimated the woman she planned to destroy. The hardest path was with Ethan. The first few weeks were a torturous silence. He locked himself in his own world of pain, and I gave him space. I knew he needed to process the loss, not of a fiancé and a father, but of the idea he had of them. He needed to mourn the life he thought he had. The healing began unexpectedly. One Saturday afternoon, the bakery was chaotic. I was on my own, rushing to handle 3 large orders. Suddenly, Ethan appeared at the back door of the kitchen. He said nothing. He just took off his coat, washed his hands, and started packing pastries into boxes. We worked side by side for hours, in a silence that was no longer painful, but companionable. That afternoon, without a single word being spoken, my son forgave me, and I knew we would be okay. He officially broke off the engagement, of course, and slowly, he began to rebuild himself. Today, he's the business manager of Caroline's Confections. He learned the truth about the family finances, about my work, and a new kind of respect was born between us, forged in the fire of the harshest truth. And me, I found peace again, but not the quiet peace of submission. I found the loud, vibrant peace of being in control. The bakery flourished. The story, as scandalous as it was, turned me into a kind of local hero for many women. They came not just for the pastries, they came for inspiration. I became the woman who said, enough, the woman who refused to be erased, the villain everyone secretly cheered for. My new life isn't a fairy tale. The scars remain, but for the first time, when I look in the mirror, I don't see someone's wife or someone's mother. I see Caroline, whole, unbreakable. The final image of my old life was of a broken family in a dark dining room. The image of my new life happened yesterday. I was in the bakery kitchen, teaching Ethan the secret to my grandmother's caramel, the same recipe I once taught Sophia. He messed up the temperature, and we laughed, a genuine laugh that filled the place with warmth. In that moment, covered in flour, next to my son, I saw our reflection in the shine of a copper pot. And what I saw wasn't the ruins of a past, but the solid foundation of a future that was, unquestionably, ours. My story, as I lived it, ends here, in the peace of a kitchen that smells like a new beginning, beside my son. But now, your part begins. I stand before you, who have heard every detail, every humiliation, every step of my plan. I have given you the facts, the evidence, and my truth. You saw the woman who dedicated 25 years to building a family and a business on what she believed was a foundation of love and partnership. You saw the husband and the daughter-in-law who, under the same roof, plotted not only my betrayal, but the financial and moral ruin of my own son. And you saw what I did about it. I did not go to the police. I did not trust in a slow, uncertain process in the courts. I became the judge, jury, and executioner of my own sentence. I used the truth as a weapon and public humiliation as the stage for justice. Society has many names for women like me. Vengeful, unhinged, cruel, a villain. I accept the label, but I ask you, what is true villainy? Is it the action of a woman who, when cornered, uses the same weapons of manipulation and strategy that were used against her to defend herself? Or is it the silent cruelty of a man who smiles at his wife while plotting to steal her son's future? Is it the explosion of someone who can take no more? Or the calculated oppression of someone hiding behind a mask of respectability? Now, I ask for your verdict. Look at everything you have heard and tell me what you see. A woman who lost her mind, or a woman who found it in the hardest way possible? Was I a criminal for exposing a crime? Leave your judgment in the comments. I want to read every word. Condemn me or absolve me, but do not be indifferent. If you believe that every story has a side that has been silenced, that behind every woman labeled as crazy is a truth they refuse to hear, then this channel is your courtroom. Subscribe, because justice never rests. And the next villain is already waiting in line to present her case to the jury. And believe me, her story will make mine look like a fairy tale. Until the next trial.